And welcome to Sensory Diets, Building Healthy Habits. Today, if you are attending, you will, within a week's time, get a certificate emailed to you so you can get those CEUs. I'm going to introduce the one and only Josh Miller. Josh is Assistive Technology Coordinator with Louisiana AIM and works at SSD in Baton Rouge. Formerly Program Director at Louisiana Assistive Technology Access Network, he is a certified assistive technology professional by RESNA and a Google certified educator. He brings a ton of experience, particularly computer access, working kids with AAC, and of course, establishing healthy sensory habits and diets. And without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Josh Miller. Josh?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Justin. I appreciate it. I hope my audio is okay. We had some last minute technical issues, as is like to happen. And so I apologize, I'm not able to turn on my camera. It decided, all my audio and video decided it was going to give me problems this morning. So I do apologize for that. But we are here today to talk about building some sensory habits. So do invite you to please follow us at Louisiana AIM on Twitter, Louisiana_AIM, excuse me. Like us on Facebook. We've seen a huge increase in our social media. Once COVID sent us home and we did these webinars, we really appreciate it. It is one metric of our success to get a strong social media following. So thank you to all of us who follow us. What are we going to do today? We're going to talk about a range of strategies and tools to address the sensory processing needs of students and children. And we're going to move swiftly through today's presentation because there is a lot of content. So, we'll talk about what is a sensory processing disorder? What is a sensory diet? I'll give you a hint. It has nothing to do with food preferences. Okay, so hopefully you got, the memo before you signed up, because I know it's a lunch and learn, and then you see sensory diet. And so maybe you think, hey, he's going to be giving us some healthy diet strategies. That is not going to happen, but we are going to look at a range of sensory strategies. Some of this stuff, if you've attended sessions that we've done in the past, the very last third of it may be things that you've seen before, but there's a ton of that I learned putting this together. And then, just resources, so much resources. So let's dive in. You can ask me questions using the Q&A feature, and Justin will be moderating those, and we will do that. We are recording the webinar, though you do have to give us a little bit of time to edit those videos and get them onto our YouTube page. So, but let's talk about it. So when we talk about sensory processing, okay, in general, there are 5 senses that we, typically, right, when we're talking about someone who is not, diagnosed with special need, they have access to 5 senses: sight, sound, touch, and smell. But there's also these 2 other senses, right? This idea of a vestibular sense and this idea of a proprioceptive sense, okay? And so that vestibular sense, that's your balance, and that's housed in your inner ear. But your proprioception, that is there's little receptors in your joints and muscles, and that gives you awareness. That tells you where you are in the world. Okay, so that's how you know that you have your arms extended, or that one of your legs is lifted up off the ground, and you can sort of feel that. So if someone hands you a piece of fruit, an orange, for example, it's going to have a texture as well as a smell, and it's going to have a taste. If you take that orange and you hold it above your head, all of a sudden now you're bringing in that proprioceptive and that vestibular input. So now that we understand just a little bit about what we mean when we talk about the sensory systems of our body, we are going to talk a bit about how we process that. So if you download the slide deck, there are extensive speaker notes. I am not going to read to you the information about the brain that I legitimately copied and pasted into the next couple of slides. But there are different parts of your brain that control each of these senses, right? And so for the purposes of today, that's going to be the extent of the neurology that we'll get into. If you want to know more about neurology, you can attend one of Justin's sessions on dyslexia. But our sensory systems, they help us learn and they help us process. So we're always taking in information from our environment. If we're outside and a neighbor is handing us a piece of mail that was delivered, But at the same time, they've got a dog barking in the background, and that startles us. Well, our brain is trying to make sense of all of the information we have at the moment. And that startle response is one of our involuntary reactions to that stimulus. And we would become very accustomed to that dog, right? So I think most of us have experienced. I know my office has a really loud circulation system. We produce all of the Braille and large print materials that go out throughout the state. And those books are very expensive. And so to protect that large amount of books, we have a very large air circulation system. And it makes it almost impossible for me to record audio in my office without using a headset mic. But I don't hear it all day long. It doesn't bother me. We also have Braille embossers, printers, and they're pretty loud when they produce Braille. And it's also something that I've been able to tune out because I've become accustomed to it. But there are folks who have difficulties processing those sensory details, and there can be side effects. And that sensory processing may come along with a different diagnosis. And so, all of the kids that we service are individuals. And so trying to figure out how that is going to affect them, it's going to be different from kid to kid. But what I am going to show you is best practices based on the research that different institutions have done. I've linked the research in this presentation. We're going to look at some strategies as to how sensory processing disorder specifically affects our students. And I will just take one moment, and hopefully all my technology works. And I am just going to really quickly, I'm going to play this video. Now, if you guys have not seen the character Julia on Sesame Street, Sesame Street a few years back released, introduced to
boing,
us
boing,
Julia.
boing, boing. This is a new way of playing.
My audio's
Alan,
good?
but I like it. It's good. Boing, boing,
Audio's good.
Yeah. So let's meet Julia, guys.
What's the matter, Julia? Noise? The sirens are bothering you?
Boing, 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 boing. Ted, you're it, Julia.
All right. Hey, Julia, let's take a break, okay? I got Fluffster. All right, come on. Come on.
Oh, come on, Abby. Big Bird.
I didn't mean to upset Julia.
Oh, it's not your fault, Big Bird. Julia didn't like the siren.
The siren, it wasn't that loud.
Oh, well, it was to Julia. Yeah, her ears are really sensitive, so some sounds are just too much for her.
Huh. Gee, I hope she's going to be okay.
Oh, she will. Oh, yeah, Julia just needs a break sometimes. Oh, she'll come back to play soon.
I sure hope so.
I can see why this is your favorite spot, Julia. It's so quiet up here. Lots of pretty flowers. It's very calming.
Fluffster.
Yeah. I know that Fluffster helps you feel calm, too. Hey, why don't we do some of your deep breathing, okay? Let's try it. All right, remember? Take a big belly breath in. Slowly out. And slowly in. Slowly out. Feeling a little better?
I'm going to stop the video there just in the interest of time and get back into the presentation. When I first became introduced to Julia, LPB did an outreach event and they played the video, and it was a very emotional situation. There wasn't a dry eye in the room because these are the students that we service, right? I think we can all, I think we've all met a student like Julia. And so I hope that that video can, help to raise awareness, perhaps if you are working particularly with a younger set, as you begin to implement some of these strategies, it may be very powerful to have folks that they can, have characters that exhibit these things. I think it helps people understand that this is like completely normal, right? I think some of us can relate to the sensory processing in our work, in our professional lives. So as we kind of dive into the situation, so Josh, what I will say too is that this can build throughout the day for some folks. So what a student may be able to tolerate when they first get there in the morning, by the end of the day, I mean, have you ever just like had enough? You just had enough. So that can sometimes happen. And this can be part of the sensory integration therapy. And so what is, sensory integration therapy? Well, we are, making a list of stimulus that we can present to our person who's exhibiting some sensory processing issues. And there are some techniques, and one of those is through the use of the sensory diet. And we're going to talk a bit about that, but there are some other strategies. Now, sensory integration therapy is going to be, that's a very specific protocol that should be administered through a trained occupational therapist. So, Josh, you may be thinking like, I'm not an occupational therapist. What is my role in this process? Well, you're going to, if you're a teacher, you very well may be required as part of that sensory diet to give some feedback or to set aside a place in your classroom or your space or a time in your instructional time to have this strategy to actually implement it, right? So if there's questions about that, let me know, but we'll jump into some strategies. So the same way your traditional diet is made up of all the food that you take in, that sensory diet is made up of all the inputs to your sensory processing systems, right? So sight, sound, smell. I've worked with people who just could not tolerate certain smells, perhaps someone microwaves, something, fish in the microwave, shrimp in the microwave, okay? And it is just not pleasant. And so all of those things break up, those make up what our sensory diet is. And so, but this also includes things like breaks, stretching routines, because what we're trying to find, you guys, and this is built into the research that Dr. Patricia Wahlberger did. She came up with the name sensory diet, because we're trying to find that just right state. And you're going to see those words, just right. And imagine that there is an ebb and flow throughout the day of how stimulated we are. Sometimes we're less stimulated than we need to be. Adults will typically have a cup of coffee. Or you guys, I wanted to turn on my camera today to show you guys a couple of things that I do. But like right now, I'm using a standing desk, okay? So I'm not seated, because not only do I have back problems, but I feel like it raises my energy level and it makes me less likely to just sit at my computer, but actually move around and talk to the staff that I deal with. So my just right state, involves multiple cups of coffee and a standing desk. And I'm actually clicking an ink pen right now, even though I take most of my notes on the computer, right? So that's going to help me get in that just right state. That helps me stay focused and it helps me stay organized. So what we're trying to do is come up with a set of strategies that we can repeat and build a routine to help process those things, okay? To help process those things. So this carefully designed series of physical activities is going to be tailored to the specific kid and what sensory input they need. We're trying to find that just right state so that they can pay attention, learn new skills, and also socialize. So what does it mean to be in a just right state? So, when someone gets overstimulated, this can help them come down from that overloaded state and bring them down to that equilibrium, that just right. Not all students are going to know when they're in that state, okay? So who can help with this? An OT can help with this. The OT can help you design what those strategies look like, something that is safe for them and something that is, it may look like when a student is low, we call it low arousal, okay? So an OT will call it low arousal. That's going to appear to you, what does that look like? That's going to be a student that's sluggish. This information is found on the link that's in the slide deck there. And so if a student is sluggish, you may have part of that sensory routine that's going to be a physical activity. So they may do 5 jumping jacks, or they may go, and if you're in the OT gym, they maybe have the trampoline with the little handles on it, and they're going to jump up and down on that for 30 seconds and then they're going to get into a yoga pose, get in the Zen bug yoga pose. I have pictures of a lot of these yoga poses. The yoga comes up quite a bit in this sensory diet because it can be used depending on how it's structured to both raise or lower arousal. Right? So it's really common. So, but you can use apparatus as well. So you may have fidgets built in there. You may have calming things such as soft or padded things like that. So anything that can raise or lower the arousal of that student on the sensory diet is going to be fair game. So, you know, that can help them come down from an overstimulated state or help them raise more energy to help even things out. So the research that Dr. Wahlberger did has shown that this exercise and input can have an effect for several hours. You can probably relate to this. I know that when I am on a physical fitness routine, so when I am going to the gym or even just taking exercise like a walk on a regular basis, I personally do notice the impact, and I personally anecdotally notice it the next day. These are, you know, strategies for people that have sensory processing disorders. Okay, so, you know, they say it's a lifestyle. Okay, it's preventative, not reactive. You can exercise during motor breaks, 15, 20 minutes, several times a day. There's a lot of research into this idea of that head inversion. So these ideas that, you know, that you're putting your hands on the ground and you are bending down where physically possible. And so the blood is actually going into your head. But you can give someone a stick of gum. You can give them a weighted blanket to fall asleep. These strategies are parts of the sensory diet. So the stick of gum, I find, raises my arousal level. And a weighted blanket, in my case, substantially decreases my arousal level. So these things, you know, when taken as part of the school day, we'll call them a motor break. Other common exercises, you've got head inverted exercises like leaning over and safely coming back again. These are things that incorporate tons of muscle groups. And the head inversion specifically, according to Dr. Wahlberger's research, is powerful to help students maintain attention. Now, you know, some folks overreact and they become overwhelmed. Some are going to show a combination of these symptoms throughout the day, depending on the environment. So just something to keep in mind. These are some examples of sensory diets. And again, we're trying to balance out over arousal and higher arousal, okay? Lower arousal and higher arousal. So if you have a student who is demonstrating sluggishness, a lack of attention, a general, you know, just a lack of energy to engage, then, you know, that child might be lethargic in the morning and it takes them a while to get moving. They may need more time in the mornings for input and things that are going on to register with them. And so a very simple strategy when they're lower arousal is they're going to do 20 jumping jacks. They're going to bounce on that therapy ball 20 times. They're going to hold one of these yoga poses that we'll look at a little bit later for about 10 seconds. And they're going to do that several times a day when they are sluggish. So just one example of a sensory diet. Same student, or perhaps a different student, and this student is high arousal. So what does high arousal mean? Well, they are over responding to stimulus. So what may to you be, I think a lot of us, I know when I first started working in education, I would hear that, you know, a lot of students, potentially those who may be on that autism spectrum, notice smells and textures and sounds that typically the teachers are not noticing, right? So they're overreacting to certain stimulus. And, you know, if there's not a behavior issue, if it's not affecting learning, then that's a different conversation. But when that inability to focus because Mr. So-and-so microwave shrimp down the road, or that inability to focus because there is a loud buzzing sound coming from the computers or the intercom or whatever it is, these strategies can help the student calm back down, right? So, you might roll them up in a yoga mat. I know that there's several, I've worked with several OTs who do sort of a deep pressure. Now, again, you want to, anytime you're applying something like that, you definitely want to partner with your OT because they have specific ways of doing it dedicated to your student. But these are common examples of, calming students down. If you guys have ever had the opportunity to hear Dr. Temple Grandin from I believe she's with the University of Colorado still, she talks a lot about this deep pressure sensation. We actually bought my wife a weighted blanket so that deep pressure, that heavy feeling of being rolled up in that yoga mat, like sort of a tortilla situation, can be very calming. And it's theorized that humans sort of revert to a state comparable to the womb. So like why does wrapping your head at night in a blanket, and so you're muffling the sounds and you're muffling the light that exposes you, and you're providing that proprioceptive, that heavy feeling, that weighted feeling. It's proposed that that's what we experience in the womb, and that it is a relaxing experience for a lot of us. So that's why the weighted blankets feel good. That's why being rolled up in a yoga mat, providing that deep pressure, feels so good. So these are some examples of high arousal. So, your OT may say this kid appears to be overactive. They're exhibiting, high arousal. And so maybe they come back from PE or lunch and they just want to continue running around or jumping around the room. This is a great time to implement that high arousal strategy. These are some of the things that you're going to see. So, you can make the equivalent of a snow angel. It may be that hopping up and down and does it, rolling on a ball, yoga poses, pushing up against the wall. And so I've linked, all these here are going to be links to different OT or sensory processing related videos and links like that. So a really, really common is the animal walks. Okay, so for those of you who are in early childhood or maybe some of the younger grades, maybe you guys do. I know in my, animal walking was limited to crabs. Okay, when I was in school, you did the crab walk, but apparently there is a way to walk like a variety of animals. Okay, so I'm going to take a second, I think, and just break it up, and I'm going to show a video about that. And when we come back from the video, we can take, if there are questions, Justin.
So far, no questions, but
okay, great. All right, thanks. It's just a quick video about animal walk. All right. So those are some really quick examples of animal walks. The snow angel is a modified jumping jack. You can do them up against the wall as well. I've seen that as well. So therapy balls, extremely versatile, high arousal and low arousal. There's a place for both of them. Always we want to make sure that we're keeping safety in mind. Nobody wants to do an incident report paperwork because they had a kid, upside down. So let's just make sure that we are, observing good safety practices and making sure that the things that we're asking them to do, that we've partnered with our OTs, we've gotten, the para perhaps to help us out with that, and just make sure that it's appropriate for the kid, right? But some examples, sitting on the ball, bouncing up and down, clapping 10 times. Several years back, and we'll look at some of the adapted seating a little bit, but I invested in tons of adapted seating. And so if you are watching this and you're like, gosh, Josh, I'd really like to try that Bumpy Chair or that Wobble Chair. It was all about the Wobble Chair 2 or 3 years ago. Everybody wanted a Wobble Chair. Well, we have them in our device loan program. So if you are around the state and you're like, hey, I really want to try one of these, you can borrow it from me. And now when I bought all that seating, I was seeing these kids bouncing on balls. I'm seeing like sort of a saucer shaped chair on the bottom. And I would ask teachers, I'm like, did they ever like fall off the chair and they would hurt themselves or anything like that? And my anecdotal research on the subject has shown that for the most part, the chairs are pretty low to the ground. The balls are fairly low to the ground. And as long as you can keep monitoring that situation, make sure that it's used appropriately. Overall, I have not heard too many concerns, though, but do keep safety at paramount, okay? So if there are no questions, I'm going to dive into a few specific examples. You know, some of these things are, I would think easier for kids. I'm not an expert, but I know that some of these are very difficult for me. That downward dog pose, pretty standard. It uses a ton of muscle groups. It included that head inversion, which Dr. Wahlberger found that she that really increases their attention. There are a ton of YouTube channels devoted to kids sort of exercise routines. Kids yoga is a whole movement out there. Yoga for the classroom is the whole thing out there. And there's Go-Go Yoga for Kids is a link that I put in here. But I have seen adapted PE teachers do there's one guy on YouTube that does sort of a daily exercise, and he's an adapted PE teacher. And so again, a little bit different than the sensory diet where we're prescribing something very specific for a very specific kid based on their level of arousal. But I think, you know, when I was looking for ideas as to what kind of activities may fit in here, there was a ton of research. And so I'll invite you again at the end of the presentation to click through all of those different links. This is Dead Bug. I'm a fan of this particular one right here. It's the Dead Bug yoga pose. It's kind of funny. Okay. You can put together an obstacle course. So you're going to put those exercises together throughout the room. The child can have input on that. And in fact, they should. If you do go and read the research from Dr. Wahlberger, if you do look at the links from understood.org and things like that, there's a strong case for the student, the kid, to have to have a say on what their calm down strategies are. Okay, what are they going to do when they get upset? And so we'll look at some actual kind of like assistive technology towards the end of this presentation. I know we're right about the halfway mark. So to that end, you know, each kid's different. They're gonna, you know, a lot of them are gonna tell you what they prefer, and you can include that in the diet. If you have access to an OT gym or something like that, those tools are fantastic to bring in. So swings, balls, ladders are very, very, very common, you know, things that you can bring in. And one strategy is that you can change these things up for a month. So you, in conjunction with your OT and anyone else on that team, would pick a month's menu, okay? And so you would find a high arousal and a low arousal strategy, depending on the kid, depending on what's necessary. And you may print out those things or find videos of those exercises online, and you're modeling them because some of our kids are not going to pick this up the first day. So you're modeling that all month. And then right around the time that they get used to it, because remember, we're trying to find equilibrium. So anything that is old hat, anything that they can just ignore, anything that does not change their level of arousal is no longer a valid sensory diet strategy, if that makes sense, right? So, so that's something to keep in mind, that you may have to change this up from time to time, both in intensity based on the situation. If they're having a particularly bad breakdown, you may have to implement the sensory diet more times in a day. Or you may need to do slightly longer hold durations on those yoga poses, right? If you're saying it's going to be a 10-second hold 5 times, maybe they do 10 seconds and you roll them in the mat again, take a break, and then maybe run through it again. But some of the tips that they said, right? So one of them is that you don't make them feel different than their peers. And so depending on the situation, that's like easier said than done, right? And so some of the ways that you can do that, especially if you're in one of those lower grades, that you can implement a classroom yoga strategy whereby the student, whereby you are using the cues from that student, his high or low arousal, to sort of dictate what we're going to do as a classroom, right? So maybe you have one student whose sensory processing is causing behavior problems. You as the professional may need to monitor that situation in the overall classroom and balance like what that student's needs are versus like, hey, maybe the whole class needs to take a brain break right now. That's one strategy that you can do. And so, but yeah, so our overall goal is to have them naturally scheduled, right? And so like, kind of back to what I said about doing sort of a whole class situation. If everybody does classroom yoga first thing in the morning and everyone does classroom yoga after PE or after lunch, and that works for that student who's on that sensory diet, then that's going to be okay. So, you know, it is recommended that you are track the changes in that level of arousal before and after the activity. So you are monitoring, you know, how successful this intervention is, and that's to not only see if it's worth our time, but to see if it needs to be modified. But I have to. So in my own experience in tracking data, I'm sure there's 104 professionals on here right now, and I'm sure that every single one of you guys track thorough data all the time, all day long. But if you don't, and you are dealing with a very, very difficult situation, you may find that you are able to identify patterns based on your data tracking. So I will admit to, you know, at certain times having a more informal strategy of determining what may work for a certain student. But in some of the more challenging cases that I've been put in, and I was tracking that data to document like my efforts to show like what steps I've taken, it amazed me at the end to see that I could very quickly start to pick up on some patterns. So I would encourage you to partner with your OT to do that. So, okay, Josh, you know, principal walks by my front door and we're doing yoga. So how do we get them back to work? Okay, so sometimes it's normal to have a student who is going to stim and just keep doing that repetitive behavior because it's fun, right? They want to bounce on the ball, they have more energy. And so, you know, as far as that transition goes, a good start is to give instructions near the beginning and the end of that break to set the tone. And as you see that they're starting to settle in that just right space, you're going to give some kind of verbal command. You may want to have a timer. So if you're going to say, hey, we're going to do a 30-second bounce on the ball, and then that's going to be it. After that, we're going to try to do math again. You're going to vocalize that. Having a timer in place would be amazing. And then you're going to give instructions. Okay, after we do the wall push, we're going to go to the table. You're going to pick up your pencil, and then we're going to start writing today. Okay. Another way that you can sort of set the tone for transitions is through the use of some type of visual support. And that is going to give the student a real sense of control. So if you've been to trainings that we've done in the past, you've seen these at length, but you know, best practices, there's a reason why they're best practices, right? It's because they are just proven to work. And there are many, many, many students who are going to benefit from the visual support because what you are doing is you are giving them a strategy that they can repeat to have a sense of control. And you are also replacing, ideally, the problem behavior. So if every time the kid needs a break, they flip out and they flip that keyboard over and they kick the kid that stands next to them, well, that is maladaptive, right? That is not going to help us. But if you can change the behavior from kicking to indicating through the break card or the visual or the token economy that they need to take a break, then you can fix the antecedent behavior or the maladaptive behavior of them getting upset and kicking someone. But it can also help them transition, and it can lessen that anxiety of those with autism, that fear of the unknown. And now when that kid is sitting there and they are thinking to themselves that they're really looking for a way out. You know, I'm sure that for many of them with sensory processing, it feels very similar to claustrophobia, where it just feels like the room is getting smaller and smaller until they have to break out. And the way that many of our students choose to break out is by causing some type of disruption. Okay. And so pairing these sensory diets with these visual strategies, with these timers that we're going to look at, can be a very powerful tool. So we're going to dive into some more examples. And where possible, I've given you links to videos and printables. This is a chiller, okay? Choose a chiller. You can print this one out. It is very specific to the tools that we had available when we made the slide, but providing that visual is so powerful for those on the autism spectrum because it serves as a reminder. Every time that they interact with that visual, it is taking the place of a verbal prompt from you or a physical prompt from you. And you're giving them a sense of independence by allowing them to choose what these are. You can set a timer and join the class when ready. So the fidget, the chiller, these things can be built in as part of a sensory diet. So you've got a student who's high arousal, meaning they are bouncing off the wall, and we need something to help them focus back in. We have determined through partnering with our OT and careful student observations that laying on the floor and doing yoga poses when used in conjunction with deep breathing. I don't know if deep breathing was an example here or if it was just in that video with Julia, but across here, breathing exercises as part of the sensory diet or part of the course. And so what you may do is you're going to say, hey, you're going to lay on the floor and you're going to do your dead bug pose. You're going to do 2 of those. You're going to hold it for 10 seconds. Okay. Then you are going to do your deep breathing. Okay. So you're going to take 5 big deep breaths. Then we're going to do a 2-minute chiller. You can pick that one on the left is one of those. There's like all these different shapes in there, like toy cars and things like that. And you have to find them. And there's like a workbook that goes with it. So it's like, hey, can you find the yellow car? Can you find the blue dog? And they spin the thing around until they do it. That thing in blue is another fidget, as I recall. These are Katie Samples fidgets. And then crayon. So you would set a timer of 1 or 2 minutes, and then they would come back in and join the class. And once again, you're setting the tone. So this would be the end potentially of their sensory diet, or it could be the beginning. How do you decide? Well, I'll answer that. You observe the student, you use your best judgment, and you partner with your OT. Do we have questions at this time, Justin?
Yes, we have one question. They mentioned that this is very difficult area working students with visual impairments. Do you have any suggestions for conveying emotions to students that have multiple disabilities, including VI?
So I may need a little more information there to clarify how I can best address that. Certainly the visual strategies would not lend themselves to that population unless you created a tactile cue. For example, Justin does 3D print when he has printed 3D tactile symbols. I'm going to ask that you email me directly and we can talk a little bit more about like what it is that is causing the issue. It is true that individuals with visual impairments often struggle from sensory processing because there's a lot going on, but they're not on this necessarily the same biological clock as the rest of us, right? So when someone is completely blind, they do not see the sunrise with us. They do not see the sunset with us. That causes disturbances to their sleep pattern. And the cause of disturbance to their sleep patterns actually causes their body to produce less of whatever chemicals that we get that sort of give you that boost of energy in the morning or make you sleepy when the sun goes down. So yeah, let's talk about that on a kind of a one-to-one, and you can feel free to expand on that question too in the chat if I didn't address it. But if you are on the campus, I'm here to help, and myself and my instructional materials specialist Kyle McKinney, Kyle can go over there as well. So keep me posted, Justin, if that gets expanded upon.
I will. I shared your email service request, and yeah, I agree with you there. It can get very specific when we're talking about tactile approaches.
Right.
For a student,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
It's how they process it, right? Not just universal for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's continue.
Yeah, that was that really could probably be its own full day training. So yeah, shoot me an email. So typically fidgets, small items, children can hold them, squeeze them, click them, spin them, play with them. I am using an ink pen right now. My colleague Justin is a known fidgeter, and he has stolen no less than 3 of that one. You see the little one on the bottom left-hand side. I have links to a lot of these things in the presentation, but that is called the Boinks Marble Fidget. I do have one in the room, but my camera doesn't work. But every time Justin sees one of them, he steals it, and I don't get it back.
And then my kids steal it from me. All right.
Well,
yeah.
That's fine. So, but the thing about fidgets is it can't be a distraction. You've got to set expectations for how and when they're used. So you might consider having some kind of a contract in place, basically setting the tone that you that the fidget cannot necessarily be in place all day long. I presented something like this to a group of grad students at LSU one time, and their professor was very polite, and she sat through the whole thing, and I was going through all these strategies and all these teacher-approved fidgets and things like that. And then at the end of my presentation, again, she was very polite about it. She just wanted to make sure that we had some kind of strategy, data-driven, of course, that to remove it, right? Because, sensory diets are great, fidgets are great. And if they're not distracting and it's minimally invasive, I'm fairly informal, it really doesn't bother me. But if it is, you do not want it to become sort of a means to an end. What you don't want is to increase the negative. I think this is the take-home message. You don't want to increase the negative behaviors that they're doing because they then get rewarded by a toy, right? So if we remember, was it psychology, probably 1002, I think, something like that. We dove into those kinds of, loops, right? So that's what you don't want to do. So how simple ways that you can try to have that not be the case, have some rules in place. Think before you grab a fidget. It's not a toy. If you distract others with it, it's no longer a game, and I'm gonna take it back, and we need you to replace it when you're done, because it is not, something that we're just gonna leave in place forever. So I did provide you in this training a list of teacher-approved fidgets. These, are all fairly inexpensive. And at the very bottom, I linked to a company called Therapy Shop. And Therapy Shop, and I will also shout out Lakeshore Learning. Therapy Shop and Lakeshore Learning have, and I'm open. I mean, if anybody has tips, put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. I'm always looking for new sensory resources. But if you go to Therapy Shop or you go to Lakeshore Learning's website, or like in Lakeshore's case, they'll still send me a physical catalog. And so if you, like in Lakeshore's catalog, if you go in the back of their catalog in the glossary and you look under sensory, you will find that they have products on 24 different pages. Things that are disposable, things that are meant to be used with the hands, chewies, large things that don't present a choking hazard, quiet things, because the auditory, the noise from the one kid who's got a pen, he's clicking his pen over and over again, right? And so they're silent fidgets, soft fidgets for kids who throw things. So there's a whole world of fidgets out there. and also pressure and weighted clothing as part of the sensory diet. Now, I will double down here and really encourage you and mandate that you partner with your OT, because these weighted items also have, I call it, I'm not an OT, so you'll excuse my lack of vocabulary, but there needs to be an extinction process in place. And if, I know enough about weighted items to tell you this: they should not be in place all day long. They are a limited amount of time. Typically, we're talking about several minutes of an hour that someone would have this on. It is not football training. We don't want to build on the linebackers. I'll tell you a quick story about a student that they used. It wasn't exactly a sensory thing, but the student was in a Riften chair. And so for those of you who don't know, a Riften chair is like a wooden chair, very specific to kids with orthopedic impairments. There's different sizes of them, things like that. Kids in a Riften chair, and he would drag the Riften chair. And so he would just scoot across the room. They're seat belted into these things, and he would drag it across the room. And so what was the strategy? They took a 10-pound dumbbell and they put it on the kid's chair. Now, these kids, they don't always move on to the next class. And so the kid was in that class for several years. And at one point I go in there and there were multiple weights tied to the chair. And I'm talking to the teacher, and it turns out the kid got stronger as he grew. And so now he's basically pulling the football sled across the classroom every day. And so that, probably could have been addressed slightly different. But we're getting to the last 10 minutes of the presentation, give or take. So if there are questions, please let me know. This last third is stuff that you can buy, and it is things that you may have seen in other presentations that we've done. So I want to make sure, in the last little bit of time that we have today, that we can try to address some of these questions. And if there are none, I'm just going to go through some of these things that we have purchased in the past, tools to get in that just right state. So love the little weighted items. Okay. You've got, and this is, I fit in this category, in that I like to chew gum. I chew gum very aggressively. I find that it does increase my arousal level. It helps me if I'm feeling sluggish, if I'm gonna go exercise. I typically grab a stick of gum and I will chew that throughout the day. I actually took it out to do this presentation. So it's, but there are a variety of other implements that are out there. And if gum's not gonna work, and you have a student who is a chewer, there are a variety of chew toys available, again, with partnership from your supervisor, partnership from your OT. This is one strategy that you may choose to put into place to address the sensory issues. Students who have autism often suffer from pica, the ingesting of non-food items. And so I did a little research on this because I was purchased several of these things. And as I would show them in presentations, people would ask me about it. And I know to stay in my lane. And so I did some research because, we can give these students like a chewable to get them to stop chewing their student ID or the buttons on their shirt or their hands. There are students who will injure themselves just by chewing on them, or they'll chew on things. I've worked with a kid who they were putting a chew stick like this in place because he was eating the desk. And so he was at some level ingesting, wood, sawdust and paint and lacquer and whatever else is on the desk because he had chewed the corner of it pretty well. And so, yes, we want our students to stop chewing. It would be ideal if they didn't, and there should be a process to try to extinguish that maladaptive behavior. Having said that, you've got the students there all day long, and they can cause damage fairly quickly chewing on things. And so if that is something that you you're observing, I would certainly encourage you to look in with, again, the OT to see if something like this could be used as part of a strategy. Okay, so chew sticks come flavored. They come in a variety of textures, and the students who need these things are going to have preferences. I worked with the student. I put one of these in place, and I'll tell you, in the past, I bought a bunch of these, and I did give a lot of them away, and I never asked for them back. So if you got a chew stick from me, that was a gimme. But the student preferred the most aggressive texture, which was like the little bumps. If you look at that cruciform one there, or there's one that's smooth, there's one that's got bumps the whole way, there's one with like half as many bumps, and then there are sort of the lines. And so he worked his way from the most aggressive texture to the smooth one. And he would chew on them, obviously, and eventually those ridges and things like that would wear down. But you can treat these two toys like these chewables, these chewing sensory aids. You can treat them like dishes in the sense that they can be either dishwashed in a dishwasher. Most of them, I would check the packaging to be double sure, but you can use soap and water. So as we kind of roll into the last little bit of other sensory-based activities that can be used in conjunction with or as a standalone to a sensory diet, we're going to look at some DIY type of stuff, right? So like teachers love this kind of stuff. So you have probably seen some of these tricks. Sensory bags, I'm just taking Ziploc bags. I'm using some duct tape and I'm putting a medium in there. We doubled up the Ziploc bags to make them a little bit more puncture resistant. If you do have a biter, I would not recommend this. A student could easily rip through that plastic, so you're going to have to use some judgment there. Sensory bins. What's a sensory bin? We're going to fill a container with some type of medium, rice, beans, beads, sand, balls, water, what have you. Pretty much everything you see on this slide, maybe with the exception of the toys, came from Lakeshore Learning. The little alligator for the fine motor, the washable sensory balls and noodles. And so the thing with the Lakeshore is that they made these washing machines safe. So what they recommend is that you put them in a garment bag. So you would buy these sensory balls, and your kids diving in there with both hands. And so like, how do you sanitize that, right? Because some of our students put other things in their mouth, or they put the balls in their mouth or the toys in their mouth, which is obviously something you're going to have to monitor very, very closely if that is a risk with your student. But you can take those sensory balls and you can take those sensory noodles and you can place them into a garment bag and you can put them in the washing machine to sanitize them. In this case, this is actually my hand, and I made a sensory bin with those jelly beads, right? So those silica beads that you will see in planters and things like that. Those are really popular. They are non-toxic. It's just silica and food coloring, and they actually it is made into a ball simply by being compressed. So I wouldn't recommend eating them, but they are not toxic. So why would you introduce these things other than raising or lowering the arousal level of your student with the sensory processing need? You can teach life skills: scooping, dumping, filling, over, under. You can teach play. If you've got a student, in the pre-COVID world that you wanted them to play more cooperatively with students, putting them around a sensory bin is a really great place to do that. You can build language. So over, under, more. Can you give me more jelly beads? Can you find the green frog in there? Go ahead, dig with your right hand too. I see you are only using your left hand. Use both hands at the same time. So there's tons of opportunities to model the language. You can drop in content-specific toys. So if we are talking about plant life, maybe the sensory bin has plants and that kind of stuff in it. If we're talking about animals, the sensory bin can have animals. So you can bring it into a variety of activities, but it really helps them understand those body senses, right? We talked in the beginning about the proprioceptive input and the fact that our body knows where we are in space. But if you have a sensory processing issue, the more sort of functional play that you can have around those things, it's just a great way that you can do it. And a lot of teachers use these things. I've seen them tons in the early childhood centers, right? So my advice, 5 minutes. All right, understood. So sensory bins, let me do a quick. Y'all, I had my calming bottles here and everything. I'm going to go through some of this real quick. All of these things, I'm assuming we're going to get some emails about this. All of these things, I'll tell you if I don't have them, but this Wobble Chair, I have these in our device loan program that you can borrow from me. I have the Bumpy Seats that if you're like, hey, Josh, I want to try this, but I don't know, how long it's going to take me to get a requisition and things like that. Can I borrow, 1 or 2 of these things from your device loan program? And I'm going to say, yeah, please do borrow those from my device loan program. That's what I'm there for you to make an informed decision. So as we kind of wrap up, the presentation today, 15, 20 minutes of structured, organized motor activity designed in conjunction with an occupational therapist offered multiple times a day based on the student's needs, based on their level of arousal. Are they too stimulated? Are they not stimulated enough? It's going to help. The research says that it's going to help with that sensory processing and put them in a better state so that you can educate them, so that you can teach them. It can help prevent maladaptive behaviors, increase focus, and just kind of help you get through the structure of your day. Fidget items, pressure clothing, and oral items can help children self-regulate. Be sure to partner with your OT and have an exit strategy. How are we going to measure the success? How are we going to take that maybe back, okay? Look at the routine, offer choices. That should have been on this slide and it's not. Offer choices when appropriate. It's a lifestyle decision and when used in conjunction with other interventions. So there's going to be a big overlap between these students and our students who are complex communicators. I would suggest to you that addressing one of those needs, such as the communication without addressing the sensory processing, or addressing the sensory processing without addressing the communication, is not going to have the effects that you want. In the last 2 minutes, I will open up for questions. I know I'm talking really fast, y'all, because there was a lot to cover, but I've got tons and tons of links, all the research that I used to put this information together. It came from the LSU Health South, it came from understood.org, it came from Dr. Grandin and things like that. So that is where the information is coming from. And with that, we can probably end recording if we've not done so and open it up for questions.